we've got some recent reports. I'm sure you have heard this by now, but the reports have confirmed that at least 12 employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, also known as UNRA, they were involved in the deadly October 7th attacks in Israel. And beyond those 12, UNRWA employees also had some 30 additionals who assisted in those attacks. And then there were an additional 200 that are operatives for Hamas or Islamic Jihad. And because of all these reports, the U.S. funding for UNRWA was paused. All right. That's a good start, perhaps. But a mere pause in funding is not what's needed. We need to stop funding UNRWA entirely. So we here at FRC, we applaud Congressman Chris Smith for introducing H.R. 7122, which is the Stop Support for UNRWA Act. And we're asking you to join us and sign a petition as we're trying to put some weight behind this and try to get some pressure for Congress to stand with Congressman Smith. So if you would sign that petition to encourage Congress to stand with Israel and to end UNRWA funding, we would encourage you to simply text the word UNRWA. That's UNRWA, UNRWA. Text UNRWA to 67742, or if you'd like to go to the website, you can simply do that by going to frcaction.org/UNRWA. And thank you in advance for your support. All right, each Friday, we have, for several weeks now, we have been trying to feature on Washington Watch a segment that highlights news and issues related to election integrity. And by the way, I've mentioned, but I have a book coming out on this topic. It's coming out on April 4th on this very issue of election integrity. It's entitled Sacred Trust, Election Integrity and the Will of the People. So that'll be coming out in early April. We encourage you to keep a lookout for that. But shortly coming into office in 2021, President Biden signed an executive order that directs federal agencies to get involved with elections. Yeah, you heard that right. And by doing this, it establishes, at the very least, it establishes the opportunity for federal employees to engage in partisan political activity. That in itself is a violation of laws such as the Hatch Act. Well, it should be no surprise to learn that according to records, specifically records that have been obtained by the Heritage Foundation's Oversight Project, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is now working with an advocacy group on the left for voter turnout initiatives. Yeah, that's no surprise either. So as part of our ongoing series looking into election integrity initiatives this election year, I've invited Hans von Spakovsky to discuss what appears to be the president's attempt to hijack the federal government for his own re-election campaign. Hans is manager of the Election Law Reform Initiative at the Heritage Foundation. He also served 2 years as a member of the Federal Election Commission, which of course is the authority charged with enforcing campaign finance laws for congressional and presidential elections. Hans, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to have you.
Well, Jody, it's nice to talk to you again.
Well, likewise, and you're looking good, I've got to tell you. Listen, many of our viewers and listeners right now have to literally be screaming on the inside when they hear news like this, saying, whatever happened to the Hatch Act? I mean, this is a provision that prohibits federal civil servants from engaging in such activity. What is the White House doing?
Well, I don't think the White House cares about that. Look, what Biden did is issue an executive order, as you said, that reaches all levels and every single department of the executive branch. And what he did is he told every single department to come up with a strategic plan. So it doesn't matter whether it was Department of Justice or the Department of Defense, come up with a strategic plan to engage in voter registration with any and all individuals that you deal with, and to help them with their voting process, obtaining absentee ballots, etc. And of course, one, he doesn't have the authority to do this. Two, he's never been authorized and provided any funding with this. But look, Jody, you know the biggest problem with this. Assume that you are, for example, applying for Social Security disability benefits, and the clerk you are dealing with says, "Oh, by the way, we may want to be sure that you get registered to vote. Oh, and here, I want to help you with your absentee ballot." Well, the people that apply for benefits for the federal government are often elderly, disabled, very vulnerable. What's their thought going to be? Boy, I better vote the way the White House would like me to vote. I better vote to support Democrats who control the government. Otherwise, I might not get my benefits.
Wow, it's frightening. So
it is,
but still, this is all such a violation. I remember my time on the oversight committee. We dealt with this issue over and over and over. And how is the White House claiming? How are they justifying this, or are they even trying to justify it?
They're not. They're just doing it. And the fact that look, all these Freedom of Information Act requests have been filed not just by Heritage, but other organizations too. And the White House and the U.S. Department of Justice have been fighting all attempts to turn over any of this information. In fact, lots of litigation lawsuits have been filed to try to force them to provide it because they don't want to do it. And by the way, part of the order, and this is relevant to the Department of Agriculture, part of the order was that they should contract with third-party organizations to help them with this voter registration. Well, they certainly aren't going to contract with any conservative organizations. All they're doing is going to their political allies, left-wing advocacy groups, to help them do that. In essence, what they're doing is moving the get out the vote campaign that normally political parties and campaigns have to pay for. They're moving that into the federal government and having the federal government get out the vote for Joe Biden and his political party and his candidates.
I think that is an excellent way of looking at this. So to take that understanding a little bit further, that basically what the president is doing is creating their own partisan get out the vote operation.
Yes.
But even beyond that, they're doing so at taxpayer expense. So the taxpayers who oppose this political agenda are having to pay for this political agenda being pushed and to get out the vote operation for something that they disagree with.
No, that's right. And what's most ironic about this is, because you mentioned the Hatch Act. Look, one of the big scandals that led to the passage of the Hatch Act in the 1930s was because in states like Kentucky and Tennessee, Democrats, bureaucrats working for Roosevelt's agencies like the Works Progress Administration were telling local folks, "Oh, do you want to get a grant or a loan from the government? Well, you better make sure that you vote the right way in the upcoming elections." That scandal helped get the Hatch Act passed.
Wow. All right. So tell us about, you mentioned a third-party group that the Department of Agriculture is now working with. As I understand it, this is a New York-based group, DEMOS, that literally helped draft the executive order that
That's right.
President Biden has used to push this policy. What more do we know about this group?
Oh, boy, they've been around for quite a while. In fact, I dealt with them 20 years ago when I was working at the U.S. Justice Department during the Bush administration. DEMOS is one of these organizations that's against any and all kinds of election reforms. They're against voter ID. They don't want voter registration lists cleaned up. They believe that aliens should be given the right to vote. I mean, you name it, and they're on the wrong position on every issue involved in election integrity. So having them involved in this is a particularly bad move by the administration. Well, it's a good move for them politically, but a bad move for anyone who believes in honest elections.
Which at the end of the day means it's a bad move for Americans. We
Yes.
bank our system largely upon the will of the people on election day, and for there to be accurate votes taking place, election integrity, so that at the end of the day, the voice of the people has been heard. And that's what our government is based upon. And this is just turning it all upside down. I can
Right.
tell you this, Hans, every conservative that I've spoken with, when it comes to the federal government involved in elections, specifically the Hatch Act rules, the Hatch Act rules have been strictly enforced throughout our government. Is the Biden administration now banking on perhaps a legacy media just ignoring the violations, or just not raising a fuss on it?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, the answer is yes to that. Plus, who is supposed to enforce violations of the Hatch Act? Why, the U.S. Department of Justice, under the control of Merrick Garland, and you and I both know that they are not going to in any way, in fact, they haven't. They've neither objected to this executive order, put up any opposition to it, and they certainly aren't going to go after any of the either bureaucrats or political appointees within different departments like the Department of Agriculture, who are engaging in partisan political activities to carry out this executive order. That's just not going to happen.
Well, when you ask who's going to enforce that, I mean, that's a legitimate question for sure. But I think to begin with, Congress has already stepped in with this, with the Hatch Act. And,
right.
You know, so the law is there. Now you need the enforcement of the law. And unfortunately, you got the executive branch pushing the violation of the law, and they're responsible for enforcing it. So what a mess we have. If I can, I'd like to switch gears real quickly before our time gets away from us. This week, a state appeals court declared that a New York City law that would would permit non-citizens to vote in local elections to be unconstitutional. So your reaction to that?
Well, thank goodness they did it. They said it was unconstitutional under the state's constitution. The law that New York passed was really bizarre. If you were an alien, not a U.S. citizen, as long as you either had a green card or more importantly, if you had a work permit, you would be able to vote. Joe, do you realize that means that if, for example, you were a reporter for the Russian propaganda newspaper Pravda, why, you would have a work permit to be in the U.S. and you would get to vote in New York City elections. Fortunately, the Court of Appeals said this violates the state constitution of New York, which says you have to be a citizen to vote. But to show you just how bad some of the judges are that we have these days, look, this was a 3-1 decision. You had one judge dissenting and saying that a provision in the New York Constitution that says you have to be a citizen to vote doesn't actually mean you have to be a citizen to vote.
Wow. Well, you know, there's no question we have people watching and listening right now who are saying, well, thank God this did come out as being seen as unconstitutional. But what about our U.S. Constitution? There are many pushing for the same thing on the federal level as well.
Yeah, they are. Now, fortunately, right now, there is in place a federal law that makes it a felony for an alien to register and vote. But unfortunately, again, you have a Justice Department that really isn't interested in enforcing that provision, even though there's plenty of information out there about aliens who have registered and voted, but, you know, the Justice Department just isn't going to prosecute them.
So I hear this all the time. Does this effort get to get out the vote and all that's going on, does this say anything about the administration's immigration strategy, you think, when we're looking at all these laws coming up to allow illegals to vote?
Oh, yes. Look, I think there's a direct connection. Look, there are many reasons why we have an open border and why the left thinks that's a good idea. Everything from the fact that they hate our culture and they want as many aliens coming in as possible. But the long-term goal, particularly for Democratic political consultants, is they see all of these aliens coming in as potential voters. And they think the more that come in, the more and greater the probability that in the future they will be voting and consolidating power for Democrats. Additionally, remember, and you know this, having been in the U.S. House, unfortunately, our apportionment after each census is based on the total population of the U.S. So states with large numbers of illegal aliens, like New York and California, actually get more members of Congress. Very unfair. That needs to be changed. But right now, because of its large population of illegals, California, for example, probably has at least half a dozen members of Congress it should not have.
Should not have, absolutely. Well, Hans, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know of anybody who knows this stuff any better than you do. Thank you for breaking it down for us.